nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. And our guest for this edition is Dick Patton, who is a very successful businessman from Seattle, an entrepreneur who has done a great many things, and who currently is devoting his energies to the defeat of the death tax, which expires, but which will return unless action is taken by Congress. Dick, what is the death tax?
The death tax is actually properly called the Federal Estate and Generation Skipping Taxes. It's a tax against the total property of a person when they die. At the moment, the first $3.5 million is not taxed, but after that, it taxes 45% of all other property, all other assets, as assessed by the Internal Revenue Service.
So even if someone has paid taxes all of his or her life, they get whacked for 45%, which might normally go to their children or colleagues or whatever.
Survival of their business, survival of the family farm, absolutely.
But now it goes to Barack Obama or George Bush, whoever happens to be in the White House.
Or Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi.
Right. Well, that doesn't seem fair.
Well, you know, it doesn't. The other taxes, and you can argue about all forms of taxes. Most of them are transaction taxes, but this is a tax that confiscates property.
And this started during World War I, didn't it?
It did. It started in 1916. It originally had a top rate of 10%. Its intent was to fund the approaching World War I. By the way, memo to Congress, we won that war and we did pay for it, but this so-called temporary tax, 93 years later, is still there.
Mm-hmm. Many of them are. I think there's a telephone excise tax that's still on.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, the Spanish-American War tax.
Exactly. And, well, surely, as people are on the verge of death, they take a look at this and they say, it doesn't seem fair to me that the product of a life's work would go not to my children, my business, my colleagues, but will go to some bureaucrat.
No, you're absolutely right. And as you get towards the end of your life and you look at what you've gathered represents what you have set aside, the time, the energy of your life, your brain power, risking your capital to gather. And as the government takes approximately half of that, is stealing the time of your life that you spent to gather that in hopes to, of course, give it to your children or whoever you choose. I
had a very good friend, David Dry, and his wife Ann. They were in their late 40s or early 50s, in perfect health. They had 8 very fine children, and like everyone else, they thought they would live forever, but they were flying in a private plane, and the plane crashed, and they both died. They had started with no money. They and their children used their hands to build a property, which a brick building, which they then sold, and they reinvested that money. They literally had no money when they started. Mm-hmm. But by the time of David's death, he owned hundreds and hundreds of middle-income apartments. And before his death, he had sold them to a company for something like $600 million. And but he didn't have all that money. He had perhaps $100 million, which seems like a lot. But as soon as he died, Uncle Sam came in and took $46 million. Yeah. And the rest went to lawyers.
And that happens so often. And the behavior of the government, by the way. My chief of staff, whose her grandparents, they started out dirt poor in the Great Depression. They built a Chevy agency in the Midwest, and again they built it with their own hands and with the time of their lives. By the time they hit their latter years, they were wealthy people. When Carrie's grandmother died, within 72 hours, the IRS is knocking on the door. They want to inventory the artwork. They want to count the silverware. They want to make sure that no taxable assets escape. Now, let me ask this. It was not time, there was plenty of time to file an estate tax form. There had been no estate tax filing. The only way the IRS could have ever shown up as if they had a vulture list of people that they suspected had property, they wanted to get their hands on it, and they watched the obituaries. That's what the IRS, in terms of the death tax, has become.
How much money does the IRS gain when people die from the death tax?
Last year, the IRS brought in $24 billion on the death tax. And interestingly enough, according to the Joint Economic Committee in Congress, Americans spent about the same amount of money, $24 billion, in tax compliance and avoidance.
Now, my understanding is that life insurance companies encourage people to buy enough life insurance so that when they die, they can not only pay burial expenses and pay for their kids' education, but so that they can cover the claims of the IRS. But you have told me that beyond that, the IRS is trying to preserve the death tax, that they're lobbying hard to keep it. Why?
That is exactly right. In fact, one of my staff members was speaking with one of the life insurance lobbyists about 2.5 weeks ago. And my staff member was informed that the number one objective of the life insurance lobby is to keep the current 45% death tax in place. The reason why...
It's not current, but right now it's zero, right?
No, right now we have a 45% death tax.
When does it go to zero?
At the end of this year, at midnight on December 31st, 2009, it goes to zero for 1 year. At the end of that year, it then goes up to 55% with a $1 million exemption.
Isn't it curious? How do they ever come up with a scheme where you've got a 1 year vacation and then it goes back to be more than ever before?
Do you really want this story?
I do.
Okay. About 10 years ago, a mutual friend of ours, Congresswoman Jennifer Dunn,
great lady,
was determined to get rid of the death tax. And because they didn't have, they had budgeting constraints. They needed to make sure that revenue fit the loss of revenue and so forth.
There's a term called revenue neutral, which I find disgusting. If you adhere to the concept of revenue neutrality, there can never be a tax cut. Because whenever you cut taxes in one place, you got to put it back elsewhere.
Absolutely,
it's a
absolutely.
It is.
Whenever
you hear somebody say, "I'm for revenue neutrality," run for the hills.
That's right. They only want a big government. Yeah. At any rate, Jennifer Dunn, she put together a bill to keep the costs down to phase the death tax out over 10 years. And so this began in 2001, and it has phased from 55 to 49, 48, 47, 46, down to 45. And then in year 10 is when the death tax went away. That way she could keep the budget cost within a 10-year window diminished. And her logic was that once we got rid of the death tax, Congress would not dare bring it back. Well, unfortunately,
little did she know.
Little did she know, and unfortunately, God bless her memory, she has since passed away, probably rolling around in her grave, because at this moment in time,
she was a young gal when she died.
She was young, sharp, beautiful, but Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, President Obama, and the life insurance lobby are currently conspiring to take away our death tax-free year in 2010.
The irony is that the guy running the life insurance lobby, Frank Keating, used to be governor of Oklahoma. He was mentioned as a possible conservative presidential candidate, and before he was paid $1.6 million a year by the life insurance lobby, he was against the death tax.
When he was the governor of the state of Oklahoma, he gave numerous speeches, which we have in our files, where he clearly spoke about the destruction that the death tax causes the farmers and business owners of the state of Oklahoma.
How does this affect farmers?
It affects farmers very, very badly. Farmers, number one, like all family business owners, they are asset rich and cash poor, and their number one asset is their land. And most farms are in a place where there is some town, some urban center that is creeping in their direction. What that means is that the theoretical price of the land is going up, 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 up. And
But they have no liquidity.
they have no liquidity. But when grandma or grandpa dies or when mom or dad die, the IRS comes in and they assess the land at what they call highest and best value. That, of course, is if you were to redevelop it into non-agricultural applications, this is the most you could get for it. The IRS then cooks up their value for that land, and they slap the family with a tax of 45% of all of their assets, and they give them 9 months to produce the cash. Unfortunately, that puts these families in a position of the only thing they can do at that point in time is to call
to get rid of the farm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're seeing the destruction.
The auctioneer.
We're seeing the destruction of the small family farm and the growth of giant agribusinesses because of the death tax in large part.
That is absolutely right. And that's one piece of what's going on the agricultural side of things. But on the business side of things, what you have is any family business that is successful and becomes capitalized, when mom or dad get up into their 60s, approaching 70, and they begin looking at the reality of the death tax, they understand that if they wait until dad dies, they're going to have to sell out under fire sale conditions. So they sell their businesses, and they sell their businesses to their publicly traded competitors, to Wall Street, to the global corporations who have the cash. So you've got small businesses that are being soaked up into the big businesses.
So Thomas Jefferson's America is being destroyed by the death tax. We have to take a break right now. Stay with us, and we shall return with Dick Patton. I'm going to ask Dick why this issue is of such concern to him. How did you get involved? Stay with us. We'll be right back with Dick Patton and the death tax.
I'm Congressman Tom Tancredo. You know, I just returned from a hearing on the southern border in a place called Brownsville, Texas. One of the participants in the hearing told us that for them, a border really doesn't exist between the United States and Mexico. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people have that attitude, that there are no such things as borders, that they really don't matter, that they're just lines on a map and nobody should pay attention to them, and that we're all just residents of the North American continent. Well, you know what? That's baloney. It's baloney, but only if you will do something about it to prove to the people of this country, and especially to your elected officials, that you know borders matter, that you know the sovereignty of this country is at risk, and that you will take action to make sure that they understand it. That action is best taken by calling your local talk radio stations, writing letters to the editor, and of course, letting members of Congress know that you know. That's the best thing. They're hoping, as a matter of fact, that no one really picks up on this issue of a North American trade association that essentially eliminates borders. But the fact is it's happening. You can see parts of it all of the time. So it's something that we need to stop. America, and I mean the United States of America, not the continent, but the United States of America is at stake. Do your part.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable, being broadcast from coast to coast on public access. And we're delighted to have as our guest Dick Patton, who's a very successful and experienced businessman, excuse me, and president of the American Family Business Institute. What in the world is that?
American Family Business Institute is a trade association of owners of family businesses and family farms. We're devoted to the sole purpose of no death taxes.
How did you become interested in this issue?
I come from 4 generations of entrepreneurs and family business owners. My father founded a very successful business in our basement that became a nationwide business.
What was it?
It was a technology company that had to do with imaging and information retrieval. His parents founded a title insurance company and so forth. I was in college when my grandmother died, and my family went through the nightmare of the death tax.
So you had personal experience?
I had personal experience when I was 27 years old and in business with my father. I went down to Olympia, Washington, which is where I lived in Seattle, filed an initiative to the voters to repeal Washington State's inheritance and gift taxes.
How'd you do?
Well, we gathered 200,000 signatures. We got it on the ballot. We ran it for the duration of the year. And in the end, 72% of Washington State's voters, given the opportunity, said, kill the death tax.
And was it killed?
And it was killed.
Good for you.
Until 3 years ago.
What happened
Washington
then?
State, unfortunately, Christine Gregoire,
I know her, yeah,
the allegedly elected governor of the state of Washington.
I know who she is.
She imposed what is now the highest state-specific death tax in the nation of 19%.
You know, what people don't realize is that estate taxes are not just imposed federally, but at the state level.
They are.
And when you think you've solved the problem by dealing with the federal tax, you have to look very carefully what's happening in your state.
And you know,
how many states are there without a death tax?
About 2/3 of the states have no death tax. Most of the states that have a death tax there's Washington, Oregon, and the Northwest. Most of New England and Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New York have them. A couple of states in the Midwest, but none of the southern states do. Many of the states in the heartland of America have no death taxes.
That's great. Now, how has the death tax hurt American families, hurt the American economy, hurt the job situation?
Let me give you a couple of examples. One of them would be local. Let's talk about the state of Washington. No sooner did the state of Washington impose the highest state-specific death tax in the nation, within 6 months, the largest family business in the state of Washington, with their 18,000 jobs, moved to Arizona. And they did not move to Arizona for the sunshine. They moved to Arizona because there's no death taxes. The treasurer of the state...
Isn't it ironic that Bill Gates wants people to pay more taxes instead of giving them the opportunity to prosper and help others the way he did?
And isn't it ironic that Bill Gates has covered himself completely from ever paying one penny of death taxes because of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? And while they're not going to pay taxes, they want a death tax. They're saying no death taxes for us, but all of you little people, you need to pay a death tax. Is absolutely duplicitous.
He and Warren Buffett are
on
the wrong side of these
absolutely.
things.
Well, by the way, Warren Buffett is another story.
Yeah. Did you know that Warren Buffett's father, Howard Buffett, was the most conservative member of the Congress of the United States?
I did know that.
You did know
I
it?
did know that.
Yeah.
And Warren Buffett today...
And his son is the opposite of the father.
The son is the opposite of the father. But Warren Buffett is a very, very, very smart guy. For example, he's developed...
Do you know that Kay Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post, was his mistress?
I did not know that.
Yeah, that was a big story a few months ago.
I did not know that. But no, he's developed a business model where he has purchased a string of family businesses whose motivation for selling was the death tax, and he scooped them up. His very first one was Dairy Queen, by the way. And he's established the successful business model of bottom-feeding family businesses, and the death tax is their motivation for selling. Secondly, we were talking about the insurance companies and the billions of dollars that they bring in by selling this second-to-die policy of quote-unquote death tax protection.
Explain what a second-to-die policy is.
Within the death tax law, there is a total exemption between spouses. So the husband dies, the wife does not pay taxes, but when the second person of a married couple dies, that's when the tax is paid. And so when the life insurance company sells somebody second-to-die policy, it is sold for only one purpose, and that is protection from the death tax. Now, last year, the death tax brought $24 billion worth of revenue into the federal government. It brought $18 $16 billion in insurance payments to life insurance companies.
Wow.
They have benefited almost as much as the federal government, and that is why they are fighting very, very hard right now to keep the death tax in place, by the way, aggressively working against the interests of their own customers.
And they're keeping it pretty quiet, aren't they?
Of course they are.
I didn't know it until you told me.
Yeah. And no, that is, within the death tax battle, that's the dirty little secret.
In addition to the family farm being forced into sell-off situations because of a lack of liquidity, what other businesses, industries, family-oriented activities are victims of the death tax?
Any family business that has become successful and has a vision for surviving. And we can actually quantify it in a way that I think will probably touch the lives of everybody listening to this program. And that's jobs. If you listen to the chatter, and whether it's President Obama or the House or the Senate, they're always chattering about jobs, jobs, jobs. Well, let's just talk about jobs. American Family Business Foundation, which is part of our organization, has just put together a study. It is on the verge of being published. It is done by Dr. Douglas Holtz-Eakin.
By the way, how's your organization funded?
By generous families who want us to represent them in this battle.
You put in a lot of your own money?
I put in some of my own money.
I bet you do.
But to get back to the subject, Holtz-Eakin has measured what is the jobs impact of the death tax. Now, right now, the death tax is at 45%. If the death tax is allowed to go up to 55%, which is what the current law says, the jobs impact will be negative 500,000 jobs in America, just by allowing it to go up to 55%.
Have you told this to President Obama?
Not yet. Now, but let's look at the other way. It's at 45%. If 45% went down to zero, it would add 1.5 million jobs to the American economy. 1.5 million jobs.
You've got to tell this to Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid and President Obama.
Well, believe me, we're getting ready to unveil this study and to make certain that every member of Congress knows this.
Who are your worst foes in Congress? We have just 1 minute left.
Collectively, our worst foes, they call themselves the Progressive Caucus. They are married with religious-like fervor to the idea that it is government's job to redistribute wealth and property.
I thought that was Karl Marx's idea.
That was Karl Marx's idea.
As a matter of fact, the inheritance tax was part of the Communist Manifesto.
It was. Point number 3 of his 10-point plan was the abolition of all right of inheritance. That's absolutely true. And whenever...
His goal was to destroy the family.
To destroy the family and to destroy property. Both of those things. This is very much a family issue.
Folks, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to give our distinguished guest 2 minutes to tell you everything you need to know. Please stay with us. We'll be back right after these messages.
Hi, I'm United States Representative Thaddeus McCotter from Michigan's 11th Congressional District. As we enter a new millennium of hope and peril, with so many problems besetting our country and yet so many opportunities before us, it is oftentimes tempting to think that your voice doesn't matter. What can one person do to make a difference in the life of their community and their country? Well, the first thing you can do is to contact your legislator. You are one of the sovereign citizens of the United States. You elect your servants to work for you in Congress. Let them know what you think. Send them a letter, send them an email, call them on the phone. Your voice matters, because if you don't raise your voice in the interest of our free republic, who will?
My name is Walter Jones. I represent the 3rd Congressional District in North Carolina, the home of Camp Lejeune Marine Base. And I'm pleased to be here today to encourage the American people to remember that their voices need to be heard by those of us in Washington, D.C., both the House side and the Senate side, that there are too many issues facing this country. There'll be a new president in 2009, and we need to let our voices be heard. From immigration issues to terrorism to the fact that this country's debt we owe China over $900 billion. But I want those people that might be seeing this interview to know that we, the American people, with the help of God, we can change the direction of this nation. Just like the American people did on the issue of amnesty when it was before the Senate. They made telephone calls, they sent faxes, emails, and they wrote letters, and they said to the Senate, do not pass this amnesty bill, and it was killed.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, I hope you'll check out the website of the Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org. And if you'd like to receive, with no cost or obligation, some of our publications, Members Message, my own twice monthly Issues and Strategy Bulletin, you can fax us your name and address or mail it to us. The fax number is 703-281-4108. The mailing address is 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. Dick, how do people get in touch with you?
Our website is www.nodeathtax.org, nodeathtax.org, and we're right here in D.C. We're very, very reachable.
Do you commute to Seattle?
Back and forth.
Back and forth.
Between the two Washingtons.
Dick, you've got about a little bit more than a minute. What's the most important thing you can tell our viewers?
Getting rid of the death tax is a battle that is based in the philosophical core of property rights. The question is this: do we have property rights, or are we merely tax-paying caretakers that when our heart stops beating, our property reverts to the government? Where do our property rights lodge, with us or with them? In a parting statement, let me simply say, no taxation without respiration.
Good. Our time is up. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope everyone viewing will contact members of the House and Senate, U.S. House and Senate, and urge them to vote to eliminate the death tax, and in your state, try to get it killed as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for
Keep up the good work.